Welcome to the Mass Shootings Iceberg. Today we will look through 8 different tiers of infamous events and study into the perpetrators behind them. Like most icebergs, we'll be starting with the most well-known events, fading into obscurity as we go further down the iceberg. Tier 1.
Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine massacre in 1999. The Columbine High School shooting, which took place on April 20th, 1999 in Jefferson County, Colorado, is one of the most infamous and well-known school shootings in the history of the United States. The tragic event resulted in the deaths of 15 people, including the 2 shooters, and left 24 others injured. The 2 shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, were both students at Columbine High School. On the day of the shooting, they arrived at the school equipped with homemade bombs, knives, and firearms. The pair had planned the attack for over a year, carefully documenting their plans and preparing for the day in question. Shortly after 11 a.m., Harris and Klebold began their attack by detonating bombs in the school's cafeteria. However, the bombs failed to fully explode, causing only minor damage. The pair then proceeded to shoot students and teachers at random in the hallways and outside the school building. As the shooting continued, the police and emergency services arrived at the scene. However, due to the chaotic nature of the event and the sheer number of victims, it took some time for the authorities to gain control of the situation. During this time, Harris and Klebold continued their rampage, eventually making their way into the school library, where they took the lives of several students who were hiding. By the time the shooting had ended, Harris and Klebold had taken the lives of 12 students and 1 teacher. In addition to wounding 24 others, the 2 students then turned the weapons on themselves as police closed in. In the aftermath of the Columbine massacre, there were many questions about the motives and mental state of Harris and Klebold. It was revealed that the 2 had been planning the attack for over a year, and that they expressed admiration for previous school shooters like Timothy McVeigh and the perpetrator of the Oklahoma City bombing. The shooting at Columbine High School also brought to light the issue of bullying and social isolation among students. Harris and Klebold were said to have been the targets of bullying and harassment themselves, and it is believed that this may have played a role in the decision to carry out the attack. The shooting has also had a significant impact on popular culture, with Harris and Klebold often seen and mentioned in several forms of media. Stephen Paddock, Las Vegas shooting 2017. On the evening of October 1st, 2017, at the close of the 3-day Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas, Nevada, a shooter who had transported an arsenal of 23 firearms to his 32nd floor suite at the Mandalay Bay Hotel overlooking the venue, smashed out 2 windows and repeatedly raped the concertgoers below with indiscriminate bursts of semi-automatic weapon fire. The death toll from this rampage shooting climbed to 59 gunshot fatalities, 58 gunshot victims, and 1 shooter by S, which is the highest single shooter incident in US history and second only to the 2011 shooting massacre that resulted in 69 deaths on the Utoya Island, Norway. Stephen Paddock opened fire on the crowd of concertgoers from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino, using a high-powered rifle equipped with bump stocks. Paddock fired more than 1,100 rounds of ammunition into the crowd below, causing chaos and panic as people tried to flee and find cover. The shooting lasted for approximately 12 minutes before Paddock turned the gun on himself, taking his own life before authorities could apprehend him. The sheer number of casualties and the calculated nature of the attack left many stunned and searching for answers in the aftermath. As investigators pieced together the events of that fateful night, they discovered that Paddock had meticulously planned the attack, booking a room with a clear line of sight to the concert grounds and stockpiling weapons and ammunition in the days leading up to the shooting. Despite this careful planning, Paddock's motive for carrying out such a horrific act remains a mystery. He did not have a known history of violence and radical ideologies, leaving many wondering what could have driven him to commit such a heinous act. The Las Vegas shooting has been followed, as are most such events, by survivor interviews and video clips, commentators discussing the political challenges of gun legislation in the country and the range of potential actions that could have been taken to mitigate the human cost of firearms in the United States. Omar Martin, Pulse nightclub shooting 2016. The Pulse nightclub shooting, which occurred on June 12, 2016 in Orlando, Florida, stands as one of the deadliest mass shootings in US history. It tragically claimed the lives of 49 people and injuring 53 others. The event targeted the LGBTQ+ community, shocked the nation, and sparked international condemnation. Omar Martin, a 29-year-old American citizen with known extremist ties, entered Pulse nightclub during its popular Latin night event armed with an AR-15 style assault rifle and a handgun. He opened fire on the crowd, indiscriminately shooting patrons. The shooting lasted for over an hour, with Martin taking hostages and exchanging gunfire with responding police officers. Ultimately, Martin was killed in a shootout with the police, ending the terror he inflicted. The victims of the Pulse shooting were a diverse group representing various backgrounds and ages. Many were LGBTQ individuals, their identities and lives tragically cut short. The aftermath was marked by grief, shock, and a deep sense of loss within the LGBTQ community and beyond. Song Hoi Cho, Virginia Tech shooting 2007. On April 16, 2007, the Virginia Tech campus in Blackbird, Virginia became the scene of a horrific tragedy. The event carried out by Sung Hoi Cho, a student at the university, claimed the lives of 32 innocent individuals and injured 17 others. The day began with a seemingly ordinary classroom setting. Cho, a senior majoring in English, entered Norris Hall around 9:42 a.m. and beginning firing students in French class. The shooting lasted for approximately 10 minutes, leaving 2 students dead and several others injured. Cho then left Norris Hall, returning to his dorm room where he changed clothes and obtained more ammunition before launching a second attack. At 9:55 a.m., just 13 minutes after the first attack, Cho returned to Norris Hall and entered a different classroom, this time targeting a history of architecture class. He opened fire, killing 30 students and the professor before taking his own life. Sung Hoi Cho, a quiet and withdrawn student, had a history of mental health issues. He struggled with depression and social anxiety, which were further exuberated by bullying and social isolation. Cho had been diagnosed with severe anxiety disorder and was on a prescribed medication but discontinued his treatment. He also exhibited signs of anger, resentment, and desire for revenge. Cho's motives remain unclear, but his writings and actions suggest a deep sense of anger and frustration with his perceived social ostracization. He left behind various manifestos and video recordings, which he even sent to a news channel. Adam Lanza, Sandy Hook, 2012. On December 14, 2012, the nation was left reeling in horror after gunman Adam Lanza entered Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, and opened fire. He killed 26 and 7-year-old children and 6 adult staff members before fatally shooting himself. Lanza, a 20-year-old with a history of mental health issues, had meticulously planned the attack. He had illegally purchased the weapons used in the shooting, including a Bushmaster AR-15 rifle and 2 handguns, and had practiced shooting at a local gun range. Shortly before 9:30 a.m., Lanza arrived at the school and forced his way in. He began firing indiscriminately at children and adults in 2 classrooms, as well in the hallway, before finally shooting himself. The entire ordeal lasted less than 5 minutes. The immediate aftermath was marked by a wave of shock and disbelief. The small community of Newtown was overwhelmed with grief, and the nation mourned the loss of innocent lives. President Obama addressed the nation, calling the shooting an unspeakable tragedy and urging a national conversation about gun violence. The tragedy also sparked widespread discussion about mental health issues and the need for the early intervention. Lanza's mental health history, including a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome and anxiety, raised questions about how to identify and support individuals at risk of committing such an atrocity.
Tier 2, Anders Breivik 2011 Norway attacks. On July 22, 2011, Norway was shaken by a series of horrific attacks orchestrated by Anders Behring Breivik, a right-wing extremist and white supremacist. The attacks, targeting both the government and young people, claimed the lives of 77 people and left countless others injured. The day began with a car bombing detonating in Oslo's government district near the Prime Minister's office. The blast, which ripped through several buildings, caused significant damage and claimed 8 lives. Later that same afternoon, Breivik embarked on a shooting spree at a youth camp on the island of Utøya, home to the annual summer camp of the Norwegian Labour Party's youth wing. Dressed in a police uniform, he tricked his way onto the island and opened fire on the unsuspecting teenagers, many of whom were just 14 to 18 years old. The massacre resulted in the deaths of 77 individuals, which is the deadliest mass shooting of all time committed by one individual. Breivik was apprehended shortly after the attacks and stood trial in 2012. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 21 years imprisonment, the maximum sentence in Norway. His trial exposed a disturbing ideology of right-wing extremism and the dangers of unchecked hate speech. Brandon Tarrant, Christchurch mosque shooting 2019. On March 15, 2019, a horrific act of terrorism rocked the city of Christchurch, New Zealand. 2 mosques, Al-Noor Mosque and Linwood Islamic Centre, were targeted in a coordinated attack that left 51 people dead and dozens injured. Brenton Tarrant, an Australian white supremacist, live-streamed the massacre on Facebook, further amplifying the horror and disseminating his hateful ideology across the globe. The attack unfolded in a horrifying and calculated manner. Tarrant, armed with semi-automatic weapons and wearing military-style gear, stormed the Al-Noor Mosque during Friday prayers, opening fire on unarmed worshippers. He then drove to the Linwood Islamic Centre, repeating the massacre. The attack lasted for approximately 36 minutes, during which time he moved between the mosques, targeting people as they tried to escape. Brenton Tarrant, the perpetrator, was a self-proclaimed white supremacist who espoused racist and extremist views. He published a manifesto online outlining his motivations for the attack. He claimed to be inspired by far-right ideologies, including anti-Muslim sentiment and desire to prevent white genocide. Unusually in this incident, the perpetrator did not take their own life, as is the common final action in such similar events, and remains one of the rare mass shooters who were incarcerated afterwards. Martin Bryant, the Port Arthur Massacre 1996. The Port Arthur Massacre, which took place on April 28, 1996, is considered one of the deadliest mass shootings in Australian history. The massacre occurred in Port Arthur, Tasmania, when a lone gunman, Martin Bryant, went on a shooting rampage that left 35 people dead and 23 others injured. Bryant, who was 28 years old at the time, entered the Broad Arrow Cafe at the Port Arthur Historic Site and began shooting at patrons with a semi-automatic rifle. He then proceeded to the gift shop and continued his shooting spree. As the horrifying events unfolded, Bryant moved to the nearby car park where he continued to target innocent bystanders. He also hijacked a car with a mother and her 2 young children inside, eventually killing the mother and one of the children. The incident lasted for several hours before Bryant was finally apprehended by the police. It was later revealed that Bryant had a history of mental health issues and had shown signs of violent behaviour in the past. In the aftermath of the Port Arthur massacre, Australia implemented some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. The government swiftly enacted the National Firearms Agreement, which banned the possession, sale and importation of all semi-automatic and automatic firearms. The buyback program was also introduced, allowing gun owners to surrender their weapons in exchange for compensation. These measures were aimed at preventing similar mass shootings in the future and have been largely successful in reducing gun violence in the country. Nicholas Cruz, Parkland, Florida shooting 2018. On February 14, 2018, a tragic shooting occurred at the Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. The incident resulted in the deaths of 17 students and staff members and left another 17 injured. At approximately 2:20 p.m, Nicholas Cruz, a former student who had been expelled from the school, entered the building through an unlocked door, armed with an AR-15 rifle. Cruz opened fire in the hallways and classrooms, targeting students and staff. The shooting spree lasted for 6 minutes before Cruz escaped and fled the scene. Afterwards, law enforcement and emergency responders arrived promptly and evacuated the school. The injured were transported to local hospitals while the deceased were identified and notified to their families. Cruz was apprehended shortly after fleeing and charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder. Cruz's motive for the shooting remains unclear. Investigators have suggested that he may have acted out in revenge, as he had been bullied and had run-ins with school resource officers. Cruz pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Again, Cruz is another rare case where the shooter was incarcerated after committing their crime. Thomas Hamilton, Dunblane Massacre 1996. On March 13, 1996, the small town of Dunblane, Scotland was rocked by a horrific tragedy that shocked the nation and world. The Dunblane Massacre, perpetrated by a lone gunman, left 16 children and 1 teacher dead and 15 others injured. The gunman was Thomas Hamilton, a 43-year-old unemployed former scoutmaster. Hamilton had a long history of mental health issues and had previously expressed violent fantasies. He had been described by neighbours as a loner and obsessed with guns. On the morning of the massacre, Hamilton entered the gymnasium of Dunblane Primary School armed with 4 legally owned handguns. He opened fire on a class of 5 and 6-year-olds who were all having a physical education lesson. The children's teacher, Gwen Mayer, was also killed in the attack. Within a matter of minutes, Hamilton shot and killed 16 children and injured 15 others. The children were aged between 5 and 6 years old. In the wake of the tragedy, the British government banned the private ownership of handguns in 1997. The Dunblane Massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in British history. It served as a catalyst for the significant change to gun control laws in the United Kingdom and inspired countless memorials and initiatives to prevent future tragedies. Tier 3. Salvador Ramos, Robb Elementary School shooting 2022. On May 24, 2022, a gunman opened fire at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, killing 19 children and 2 teachers, where afterwards 18-year-old Salvador Ramos was shot and killed by law enforcement officers. The shooting was the deadliest school shooting in Texas history and the deadliest elementary school shooting in the United States since the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012. The day began with Ramos crashing his pickup truck near the school. Ramos then exits the truck and fires several shots at 2 people outside the school, injuring one of them. He then enters the school through an unlocked door, goes into a 4th grade classroom and begins shooting. The first police officers arrive at the school and eventually breach the classroom and kill Ramos. The investigation into the shooting is still ongoing. Law enforcement is investigating Ramos' motives and how he was able to purchase a gun legally. The investigation has also revealed that there were numerous failures by law enforcement officers during the shooting. Police waited more than an hour to breach the classroom where Ramos was shooting, despite the fact they knew there were children inside. President Joe Biden called on Congress to pass legislation to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and will be launching a review of the law enforcement's response to the school shooting. Robert Steinhauser, Erfurt School Massacre 2002. The Erfurt School Massacre, which took place on April 26, 2002, at the Gutenberg Gymnasium in Erfurt, Germany. This tragedy, which claimed the lives of 16 people, 12 students, 2 teachers, and the perpetrator, and injured 11 others. Robert Steinhauser, a 19-year-old former student of the school, was the perpetrator of the massacre. He had a history of mental health issues, including depression and anxiety, and had been expelled from the school for academic failure. Steinhauser was obsessed with violent video games and had a fascination with firearms. He had obtained and legally held hunting license and purchased a 9mm semi-automatic pistol and several ammunition magazines. On the morning of the massacre, Steinhauser arrived at the school armed with a pistol and a backpack filled with ammunition. He entered the school during a school assembly, shooting at students and teachers indiscriminately. He then proceeded to other parts of the school, continuing his rampage. The massacre lasted for approximately 10 minutes before Steinhauser turned the gun on himself. Following the massacre, a comprehensive investigation was conducted by the German authorities. The investigation revealed that Steinhauser had exhibited warning signs of his intentions, including mentions of violence in his writings and online activities. However, these warning signs were not recognized or addressed by authorities or his family. James Holmes, Aurora Theatre shooting 2012. 2012, horrific act of violence unfolded at the Century 16 movie theatre in Aurora, Colorado, forever etching itself in the annals of American tragedy. The Aurora shooting, as it became known, claimed the lives of 12 innocent people and injured 70 others, leaving a trail of grief and trauma in its wake. James Holmes, a 24-year-old former neuroscience graduate student, meticulously planned and executed the attack, driven by a complex and still debated set of motivations. Holmes donned body armor and unleashed a barrage of gunfire from multiple weapons, including an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and a shotgun. He targeted the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. The victims, ranging in age from 6 to 51, included children, teenagers and adults, their lives tragically cut short. The families and friends of the deceased navigated unimaginable grief, while the survivors battled physical and emotional wounds. Holmes was arrested shortly after the shooting and subsequently charged with 166 counts, including murder, attempted murder and explosive charges. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming he was suffering from a psychotic break at the time of the attack. However, the jury ultimately found him guilty on all counts, rejecting his insanity defense. In August 2015, Holmes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, delivering a measure of justice to the families of the victims. Vladislav Roslikov, Kerch Polytechnic College Massacre 2018. On October 17, 2018, the Kerch Polytechnic College in Crimea, Ukraine, became the scene of a horrific massacre. 18-year-old Vladislav Roslikov, a student at the college, opened fire on students and faculty, killing 20 people and injuring over 70. Roslikov, armed with a shotgun and hunting rifle, stormed the college after setting off an explosive device that caused a fire in the building. He then systematically targeted students and staffs, firing indiscriminately in hallways and classrooms. His rampage lasted around an hour before he took his own life. The victims of the massacre included students, teachers and staff of the college. Many were young, with the youngest victim being just 15 years old. Investigators determined that Roslikov had been planning the attack for several months. His social media post revealed a history of depression, isolation and anger. The exact motive for the massacre remains unclear, but experts believe it may have been a combination of mental health issues, personal grievances, and a desire for revenge. I have found this case very unique for being one of the only CCTV recorded shootings out there. The aftermath of the massacre has had a lasting impact on the Crimean community and has sparked a national debate about school safety and gun control in Russia. George Leonard, Luby's Massacre 1991. The Luby's Massacre, also known as the Luby shooting, occurred on October 16, 1991 in Killeen, Texas. The perpetrator, George Henner, drove his pickup truck into the front window of Luby's cafeteria and proceeded to open fire on the patrons inside. The massacre resulted in 23 people being killed and 27 others being injured before Henner turned the gun on himself. Around 11:30 a.m., Henner drove his pickup truck through the front of the entrance of the crowded cafeteria. He rammed the vehicle into the main dining area, shattering windows and sending debris flying. Henner then emerged from the wreckage armed with 2 handguns and began firing indiscriminately at the terrified patrons. Henner's rampage lasted approximately 15 minutes. He systematically moved through the restaurant, shooting anyone in his path, including children, elderly people, and pregnant women. The scene was chaotic and bloody, with customers desperately trying to escape the carnage. George Henner, a man with a history of mental health issues, had been struggling with depression and paranoia for years. He had been fired from his job and he was facing financial difficulties, fueling his anger and resentment. In the days leading up to the massacre, Henner revealed his intentions to his family, experiencing his desire to go out in a blaze of glory. He also left behind an S-note, blaming his actions on the system and his perceived mistreatment. The motive for the massacre remains unclear, but Henner's actions were fueled by anger and hatred towards women as he reportedly shouted misogynistic slurs through the attack. Prior to the massacre, Henner had a history of violence and had been involved in several confrontations with women. Tier 4. Devin Patrick Kelly, Sutherland Springs, 2017. On November 5th, 2017, the small town of Sutherland Springs, Texas was shattered by a horrific act of violence. A lone gunman, Devin Patrick Kelly, stormed into the First Baptist Church during Sunday morning services, opening fire and killing 26 people, including a pregnant woman and 14 children, while injuring 20 others. Kelly was a 26-year-old former U.S. Air Force member with a history of mental health issues and domestic violence. He entered the church around 11:20 a.m. Armed with a Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle, he opened fire on the congregation, targeting worshippers in the pews and even shooting at individuals attempting to flee the building. The shooting lasted approximately 5 minutes, causing terror and chaos within the church. Following the attack, Kelly fled the scene in his vehicle, but was pursued by a local resident, Stephen Wilford, who had armed himself after hearing the gunshots. Wilford engaged Kelly in a shootout, ultimately causing the attacker to crash his car. Kelly was later found dead inside the vehicle, with authorities determining he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 26 lives lost in the Sutherland Springs tragedy included members of the congregation, individuals attending a children's choir practice, and a visitor from another state. Among the victims were 8 children under the age of 12, with the youngest victim being just 18 months old. A thorough investigation by law enforcement revealed that Kelly had a history of mental health issues and domestic violence, including a court-martial for assaulting his wife and stepson. Despite these issues, Kelly was able to legally purchase firearms, highlighting concerns about gaps in the background check system. Additionally, investigators found that Kelly had been denied a concealed handgun permit in Texas due to his history of domestic abuse. The First Baptist Church has since been rebuilt and reopened, providing a place of healing and remembrance for survivors and families. Elliot Rodger, Isla Vista killing 2014. On May 23, 2014, a horrific tragedy unfolded in the idyllic coastal town of Isla Vista, California. The Isla Vista killings perpetrated by Elliot Rodger, a 22-year-old local resident, left 7 people dead and 14 injured. The rampage began with Rodger stabbing 3 roommates to death in their apartment. He then drove to a nearby sorority house where he fired shots into the building, injuring several women. Subsequently, he went on a shooting spree in the streets, targeting a group of young men and a young woman. Rodger ultimately killed himself after a police chase. Elliot Rodger, a troubled young man, struggled with social isolation and a sense of entitlement. He documented his frustrations and plans in online videos and writings, highlighting his feelings of rejection and anger towards women, who he believed owed him affection and intimacy. His writings also conveyed a deep sense of resentment towards the popular crowd, whom he perceived as having everything he desired. Rodger's manifesto, uploaded online after his death, outlined his detailed plan for revenge. The incident highlighted the dangers of online radicalization, with the perpetrator subsequently becoming a martyr for certain extremist groups. Dylan Roof, Charleston Church shooting 2015. The Charleston Church shooting took place on the evening of June 17, 2015 at Emmanuel Methodist Church in Charleston, South Carolina. The shooter, Dylan Roof, specifically targeted the historic black church and opened fire during a Bible study session, killing 9 people and injuring 1. The attack was motivated by Roof's racist beliefs and desire to incite a race war in the United States. Roof entered the church with a concealed handgun and sat through the Bible study session before standing up and opening fire on the unsuspecting congregation. The victims included Pastor Clemente, who was also a state senator, as well as other church members and visitors. Roof was captured the following day in North Carolina and was charged with 9 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. Roof's motive was driven by white supremacy and hatred of African Americans, in which he believed that the church shooting would ignite a racial uprising. During his trial, he showed no remorse for his action and expressed white supremacist views. In December 2016, Roof was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to death. The trial brought attention to the ongoing issue of racism in America and highlighted the importance of addressing systemic inequalities and promoting unity. Rodney Stair, Weis Markets, 2017. On June 8, 2017, a tragic shooting occurred at a Weis Market grocery store in Eaton Township, Pennsylvania. The shooter, identified as Randy Stair, was a 24-year-old employee of the store. Stair arrived at the store wearing a camouflage face mask and armed with 2 shotguns as well as a pistol. He entered the store just before closing time and began shooting at his co-workers and customers, resulting in 3 deaths and several injuries. The motive behind the shooting was later revealed through a series of videos and social media posts made by Stair prior to the attack. In these videos, Stair expressed his deep-seated hatred and resentment towards the Lord and his desire to commit a mass shooting. It was clear that he had been planning the attack for quite some time and had even created a detailed plan for the massacre. During the shooting, Stair methodically hunted down his co-workers, shooting them one by one while reciting chilling lines from a manifesto he had written. The entire incident was captured on the store's surveillance cameras, providing law enforcement with crucial evidence as they worked to piece together the events of that fateful evening. As a result of the Weis Market shooting, there was an outpouring of support from the victims and their families, as well as calls for stricter gun control measures to prevent future tragedies. Patrick Cruzius, El Paso shooting 2019. On August 3, 2019, a tragic mass shooting occurred at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. The shooting left 23 people dead and dozens more injured, making it one of the deadliest mass shootings in the United States in recent years. The shooter, a 21-year-old white male named Patrick Cruzius, targeted Hispanic shoppers in what authorities described as a hate crime fueled by racism and xenophobia. The shooting took place in a crowded Walmart store on a busy Saturday morning, when families were doing their weekend shopping. The shooter entered the store armed with an assault rifle and began firing indiscriminately at shoppers. Chaos and panic ensued as people tried to flee the scene or hide from the gunfire. The quick response of law enforcement officers helped to end the shooting and apprehend the suspect. In the aftermath of the shooting, authorities launched a thorough investigation into the shooter's motives and background. It was revealed that the shooter had posted a hate-filled manifesto online just before the attack, expressing anti-immigrant and racism sentiments. The manifesto cited the Hispanic invasion of Texas as a motivation for the shooting. and echoed the rhetoric of white supremacist groups to promote violence against minority communities. Crucius was arrested and charged with capital murder. He pleaded guilty to 90 federal charges, including hate crimes, and received 90 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The El Paso shooting was a horrific tragedy that exposed the deep-seated problems of white supremacy, gun violence, and hate crimes in the United States. And that is where part 1 concludes, everyone. In part 2, we will take up where we left off and explore the final 4 tiers of the iceberg. Thank you for watching.